Trump wants to put a global tariff wall around China so that China can't sell any of its goods anywhere in the world, so that China's economy will crash and China will no longer be a national security threat to the US. So China must view this as an act of war, as an existential threat to the survival of the Chinese Communist Party. And they are going to retaliate very hard in ways that will be very painful for the average American.
Hello, hello, hello. Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Radio Show, broadcasting from Arizona. And today we have a very special, one of my original guests, 25 years ago, I believe now. And Richard Duncan. And we're so old. I found his book in Borders bookstore, which is now gone, out of business by Amazon. I mean, so much has transpired because things are moving so quickly. But the reason I'm very excited to call Richard my friend is I was in Borders bookstore, and his book went pss, pss, pick me up. And it was a book called The Dollar Crisis. And I went, holy moly. And it was the perfect book for me to read because what Rich did, he verified what my rich dad and what Bucky Fuller were saying about our currency, our money, the dollar crisis. And Richard's credibility is impeccable. He's an economist from Babson, but also with the IMF and also the World Bank. So he knows what he's talking about. He comes from experience, which is crucial today. And Richard is also sitting on the border of China in Thailand, which I often wondered why, but Thailand's a beautiful country. But I remember Richard, when the Thai baht collapsed, that was an interesting time to be in Thailand also. So anyway, Richard, as an old friend and, trusted advisor, welcome to the Rich Dad Show.
Thank you, Robert. It's really great to be back. Thank you for having me back. It's great to see you.
And the crisis is getting worse, isn't it?
Oh, so much worse, so quickly, it's hard to describe. I'm really extremely concerned that the global economy could collapse into a new Great Depression and that the dollar standard could completely blow apart.
Yeah. So let's go. I want a couple of definitions. Like I was listening to this one guy speaking about the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency of the world. So as a classically trained economist, what does that mean to a layperson that is the reserve currency? What status is that? Why is that so good or bad? What's the thing about it?
It's very important that the U.S. has the reserve currency. It means it's the main currency in the world that other countries trade in. India uses dollars to buy things from Brazil, and Brazil uses dollars to buy things from Saudi Arabia. And the reason that the dollar is the reserve currency, first of all, we won World War II, and all the other countries in the world were broke and didn't have any gold. And so we pegged the dollar to gold, and everybody else pegged their currency to the dollar. And so initially, that was the establishment of the dollar as the reserve currency. But the reason it's remained the reserve currency is because since 1980, the United States has had extremely large trade deficits with the rest of the world. In fact, $16 trillion of trade deficits with the rest of the world. And that has thrown out $16 trillion into the global economy, making the trade surplus countries $16 trillion richer. And they have $16 trillion. And with these $16 trillion, they must invest them in US dollar assets like Treasury bonds or stocks or Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac bonds or corporate bonds. So this money boomerangs back into the United States and helps finance our very large government budget deficit. So this has been very advantageous to the entire world because it's allowed the rest of the world to grow much more rapidly than they otherwise could have by selling $16 trillion worth of goods to the United States that they couldn't have otherwise done. And it's been very beneficial to the United States because that $16 trillion has come back and been invested in US dollar assets, pushing up the stock market, pushing up bond prices and holding down bond yields and making it very easy for the government to finance its extremely large government budget deficits.
Yeah, so the point here is this. Back in, was the Bretton Woods in 1940, was it 1944, the agreement, the U.S. dollar became the reserve currency, but it promised we would back our dollars with gold. And that's when Tricky Dick Nixon in 71 took us off the gold standard, which made the dollar, U.S. dollar, 100% credit, debt. And now we print and print and print and print and print. And we're now, I think the U.S. national debt is like 36 trillion off balance sheet liabilities, including Social Security and Medicare. They estimate is around 250 trillion. And then they will say, well, Japan's in deep trouble also. So is Japan, but they're financed internally. I mean, their debt is financed by the Japanese people. The world finances America. And when they start dumping our bonds, which they're doing right now, that's what I want to find out from you. As, like, again, a classically trained economist, you worked with the IMF and the World Bank, and you're sitting in Thailand out there next to our buddies in China. I'm going, que pasa? What is going to happen, Richard? How serious? Because you wrote the book, The Dollar Crisis. Can it be a much bigger crisis than this?
Right. So I wrote The Dollar Crisis in 2002. And that's the one that you saw, and that's how we got to know each other. Yeah. And in the dollar crisis, I was very worried about these very large U.S. trade deficits that were destabilizing the global economy. They were blowing the trade surplus countries into bubbles like Japan and later on China. And the money was boomeranging back in the United States and blowing the U.S. into a bubble. And I said, this bubble in the U.S. is going to pop. And it's going to lead to a financial sector crisis and a severe recession, and probably a collapse of the dollar standard in the global and the dollar reserve currency status. Well, so that collapse actually did happen in 2008, and the financial sector almost did collapse. There was a very severe recession, but the government managed to reflate the bubble with trillions of dollars of paper money creation and trillions of dollars of budget deficits. So the Great Depression that I foresaw at that time didn't happen. I just jotted down how things have changed since then, 22 years ago. At that time, the trade deficit was $450 billion in 2002. Last year, it was more than twice that much, $1.1 trillion. And the cumulative deficit, if you add them up over the years, in 2002, the cumulative deficit was $3 trillion. Now it's $16 trillion. In 2022, the U.S. government, the total debt in the U.S. was $33 trillion. Now it's $100 trillion, so 3 times larger. The government's debt in 2002 was $6 trillion. Now it's $36 trillion, 6 times larger. The total assets of the Fed, how much money they created back then, that was $700 billion. It peaked a couple of years ago at $9 trillion. Wealth in the United States in 2002 was $46 trillion. Now it's $169 trillion. And China's economy in 2002, it was $1.5 trillion. Now it's $18 trillion. Gold was $300. Now it's $3,500. So my point is that by keeping this bubble inflated in 2008 and again in 2020, it's made this global bubble so much larger than it was when I first wrote The Dollar Crisis in 2002. Now I think we're so much more vulnerable than we were then, and it's going to be so much more difficult to keep this bubble inflated. And so I think we're now moving into I've just published a new Macro Watch video today called The Dollar Crisis 2025. I think we're moving into this new period where the dollar is going to plunge like it did after 2002. Between 2002 and 2008, the dollar fell 41%. And that had seriously destabilizing consequences for our trading partners, for the global economy, for the U.S. financial markets, and ultimately the global financial crisis blew up entirely in 2008. So now we're in this situation where have a much bigger bubble and much less firepower to try to combat it if the bubble pops. So now we're turning to your question about what's going to happen if other countries start dumping our Treasury bonds. This is a real concern. And so President Trump, as you know, has put up very high tariffs on all the countries in the world, but especially on China, 145% tariffs on China. And he has a plan. There is a strategy. This strategy was laid out in a paper by a person called Stephen Moran, who is the chairman of the Council of the President's Economic Advisors. And here's Moran's three-step plan. Step one is to put very high tariffs on all the countries of the world. Step two is then to threaten all of the other countries in the world to remove the United States security umbrella from them if they dare to retaliate against the high U.S. tariffs. And step three is then to force all of these countries to devalue the dollar, into an agreement to devalue the dollar, like a new Plaza Accord. This would be called the Mar-a-Lago Accord. Now, everyone has read this paper by now in terms of the policymakers, central bankers, the hedge funds, all the big banks. So they know that President Trump wants to devalue the dollar. This is the main part of the strategy. So the only sensible thing for anyone to do who understands that President Trump wants to devalue the dollar is to sell US dollar assets as quickly as they can before the dollar gets devalued. Because if the dollar gets devalued, it's already dropped 10% from January. It could drop another 30% or 40%. All of these people, especially the foreigners holding dollar assets like Treasury bonds, would suffer enormously from a huge devaluation. So they want to sell their Treasury bonds and their other dollar assets like stocks. And this is what they've been doing. So in the recent turmoil in the stock market, we've seen a very unusual thing happen. Normally, when
Richard,
yes.
you're going too far. Okay.
Okay.
We can only take so much at a time. My brain can't handle much more.
Okay.
So gold keeps going up because they're dumping treasuries and buying gold. That's what the central banks are reportedly saying, plus silver.
Right.
And where America got in, Trump wants to devalue the dollar. That means make it weaker so that they'll buy more American products. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
And then the rest of the world goes, he's threatening us. And what you're saying is that he says, if you don't play ball, we'll stop protecting you. Is that
exactly
basically
right?
That's what he's saying.
That's what he has said.
Yeah. So as a American sitting on the border of China on Thailand, what do you think the Chinese are thinking right now? And then we'll go to a break for this, but make it quick. What do you think the Chinese are going to do now?
So Trump wants to put a global tariff wall around China so that China can't sell any of its goods anywhere in the world, so that China's economy will crash and China will no longer be a national security threat to the U.S. So China must view this as an act of war, as an existential threat to the survival of the Chinese Communist Party. And they are going to retaliate very hard in ways that will be very painful for the average American.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to give you everybody, I love this guy, Richard Duncan. He explains things so I can understand it on a macro level. And he has a product called Macro Watch, which you can subscribe to. And the thing I like about it is Richard uses pictures, graphs, and charts. so you can understand this. Well, I think what Richard is saying here, been friends for 25 years now, is the most important time we need to pay attention, because this is no longer just about money. It's about war, and we're entering into a war right now. So when we come back in a few minutes, we'll have more of Richard Duncan and talk about why Trump and tariffs and China and weakening the dollar and gold and all this, why you need to pay attention to it. We'll be right back.
Rich Dad likes gold. Rich Dad likes Bitcoin. Rich Dad owns both. But right now, Rich Dad believes silver might be the most overlooked opportunity of them all. Here's why. Demand for silver is exploding, used in solar panels, electric vehicles, computers, electric product, weapon systems, medicine, and even water purification. But unlike Bitcoin or gold, silver supply is going down. And best of all, it's still the cheapest. Gold is breaking all-time highs. Bitcoin hitting new records. Silver is still 60% below its all-time high. Why? Silver is useful, and the price has been suppressed for decades to keep it affordable for industry. But Rich Dad believes that manipulation is over, and Rich Dad believes silver is about to slingshot to all-time highs, possibly $70 an ounce in 2025. So if you want to understand what's happening, how to take advantage of it, text the word silver to 24999 and get your free 2025 silver forecast guide from Rich Dad's trusted silver source, Priority Gold. You'll learn what's driving silver and how to buy it smart before the next surge. Again, text silver to 24999 right now to claim your free 2025 silver forecast guide and get ahead before silver takes off.
Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Today our guest is a longtime friend, Richard Duncan. And when I was first starting with Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I saw his book in Borders bookstore before Amazon wiped him out. But and his book was The Dollar Crisis, and we're kindred souls after that, because I was a student of Dr. R. Buckminster Fuller. He wrote a book called The Grunch of Giants, Grunch. Gross Universal Cash Heist is how our wealth is stolen via our money, via inflation and taxes. So anyway, that's why with Rich Dad, we said you don't work for money, you work for assets. And I save gold and silver and today Bitcoin. So Richard Duncan is saying something that's very important to me is this. If you look at history, where now we start off as a currency war. So that's the devaluing of the dollar, moving it up and down. Then we go into a trade war or a tariff war, which Trump is pulling right now. And then from the trade war, we go to a kinetic war. And I was just in the South Pacific touring the battle sites like Iwo Jima and Okinawa and Guadalcanal and Peleliu. And I was out there this time. The Japanese aren't there anymore, but the Chinese are there. And the Chinese have become our adversarial person. So Richard sits on the border of China and Thailand, or China and Thailand. But every time we've had a currency war, a trade war, it goes to a shooting war, was a thing called the Boston Tea Party, 1773. It was a battle against the tariffs, the taxes on tea, which led to 1776, the American Revolution. My concern is, and what Richard's concern is, we're on the verge of going to a shooting war. Like I said, I was just out in the Pacific. Japanese aren't there anymore, but the Chinese are. And we're building huge runways and over the earth, over the curvature radar, and we're getting prepared for war. And this next war, and the same as in Gaza and the Ukraine, this next war will not be pretty. So Richard, with that, again, he has a program called Macro Watch. Please subscribe to it, because what Richard is covering now is so much. He's got more and more in his repertoire, and I strongly suggest subscribing to Macro Watch, and there's a discount for it that Richard offers. But this is not a time to be stupid or ignorant. This is a time to be paying attention to macro as well as what's happening on micro, what's happening in your pocket. So Richard, take it away.
So thanks, Robert, for mentioning Macro Watch. If your listeners would like to subscribe, they can subscribe at a 50% discount if they use the coupon code crash. That's crash. And now going back to China, before the guns really begin firing, there are so many ways that China can retaliate against the United States for imposing these very high tariffs on Chinese goods and trying to force all of the United States trading partners to also put very high tariffs on Chinese goods. China can retaliate economically, and they can retaliate militarily. Here are just a few examples. China has $1 trillion of Treasury bonds. They could dump those, and that would cause U.S. interest rates to spike. Then another thing they could do economically is they could actually ban all Chinese exports to the U.S. Say, we're just not sending you any more exports. And immediately there would be shortages in the United States of practically everything. There would be consumer shortages. The consumers would freak out. There'd be very high rates of inflation. The economy would, the supply chains would come to a standstill, and that would crash the economy. Another thing they could do economically is they could close all of the American businesses in China. Things like Tesla, all of the American banks, all of the American retailers like Walmart, Starbucks, McDonald's, all of them, shut them all down overnight.
Apple computers.
Apple, and that would be a very serious blow to U.S. corporate profits. And then they could retaliate militarily, beginning with Taiwan. They could attack Taiwan, or something slightly less. They could put enclose Taiwan with their navy so that nothing could come in and out of Taiwan. And that would challenge the United States to see if the U.S. actually has the nerve to try to end this blockade. Or another military response, they could get their North Korean friends to start lobbing rockets into South Korea or even into Japan. And that would force a U.S. military response as well. Or another example, China could send tens of thousands of Chinese troops into Ukraine to fight alongside the North Koreans and the Russians, to send Europe a message of how rough things could get if Europe actually goes along with the United States plans to put up very high tariffs on Chinese goods. So all of these things would just cause havoc throughout the global economy, crush the U.S. stock market, send it into a very severe recession. And even if things stand...
Let me back up one more second, okay? You said something earlier. When they hold our treasuries, which is our debt, if they dump that, interest rates go up. That'll destroy us also, because we owe, $36 trillion, and the interest payment on that would be greater than we go broke. We couldn't make that. That'd be like you having $1 million in debt, and your credit card guy says, "Pay it or go. You're dead. We're dead."
Well, you're right. So you're
this is
absolutely...
a war on all levels right now, militarily, financially, and tariffs, and that all this stuff.
So if they did start dumping their Treasury bonds, the Fed, that would cause the bond prices to drop and cause the bond yield, the interest rates to spike up. The Fed would have to respond by printing trillions of dollars and buying up every Treasury bond that China sold, creating a new surge of the U.S. money supply, which would lead to very high rates of inflation, especially at a time when we're not getting any imports from China. The trade tariffs are already going to be extremely inflationary. And then if the Fed starts creating another crisis round of quantitative easing of $1 or $2 trillion, that's going to lead to inflation at least as high as we had a few years ago, and perhaps higher.
So let's get into what can a person do. I mean, I really want everybody to subscribe to Macro Watch, put the word crash in there, get a discount on it. But what Richard is saying, this is the macro. If you play the cash flow board game, it's the micro. It's what are you going to do about it? So there's macro, and then there's micro. So what I've been doing about it, as Richard knows, is I own gold mines and silver, and I own Bitcoin. I don't save the dollar. I'm converting as fast as I can to things the U.S. government cannot mess with. So what else can a person do, Richard? I mean, to protect themselves in this most critical time? And I'm afraid most Americans don't know how critical it is. That's the scary part.
The thing about these crises is they don't just occur at one moment in time. They play out over time. And over time, what investors need to do changes as the environment changes. So how this is likely to play out, I believe, is in the near term, over the next few months, 6 months at the latest, we're going to have much higher levels of inflation in the United States because of the trade tariffs. And at the same time, because of those policies and the other Trump policies like DOGE, firing a lot of government workers and cutting spending, there's going to be a recession. So we're going to have inflation and a recession at the same time. That's stagnation. And it's going to also cause a severe fall in asset prices as U.S. corporate profits get hit. And as the stock market falls considerably further over the next 6 to 9 months, we're going to start seeing some financial institutions begin to get into trouble, like we did last time with Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns. And then eventually the entire financial system collapsed in the US in 2008, and they had to be bailed out. So we're going to get to that point. And right up until that point, everyone's going to be selling US stocks and US assets. But when the crisis really hits and the banks start to fail, as they did in 2008, then the situation is going to change, because the Fed is going to jump in and start creating trillions of dollars to bail out all these banks again. And the government's going to have trillions of dollars of budget deficits to pump up the economy. So the Fed and the government working together will keep this economy from completely collapsing again, the way that they prevented the economy from collapsing in 2008 and again in 2020. But this time it's going to be different, because this time is going to be more like the COVID period, but perhaps worse. COVID had global supply chain bottlenecks. And so when the Fed printed a lot of money with the supply chain bottlenecks, there was a lot of inflation. The situation is going to be the same this time. The Fed's going to be printing a lot of money to prevent a depression, but we're going to have global supply chain bottlenecks because we have this trade war with China, and we can't buy any products from China. So we've got a tariff supply shock that's inflationary, and we have a demand supply shock, a demand shock that's also inflationary from the Fed creating a lot of money. So these two things together are going to create very high rates of inflation. Now,
Richard, so what can a person do? I mean, besides ordering macro was to understand the big picture, micro, see the board game behind me is about the micro. What can I do? What do I do? So like I say, I own gold mines and silver mines. I own lots of Bitcoin. I'm getting away from the dollar. I own cattle because people have to eat. So in inflation, I'm counting on the price of cattle to go with it. So we've got to get out of the macro right now, Richard, but what is in the micro for these people? What do you see? Because what I see in China, isn't China and Syria, they're having unemployment problems and all that because it is backing up on them.
Right. So China has a totalitarian system that they can keep everybody in check. But what Americans can do is, in the near term, they can expect stock prices to fall and the dollar to fall. So if they're brave, they can short stock prices and they can short the dollar. Now, and also they can buy gold, because gold will keep appreciating as the dollar falls. Now, when the crisis really explodes, the 2008 global financial crisis, when it hits, when the banks start failing and the Fed jumps in and starts printing a lot of money again, then stocks will go up. They will rebound and the economy will stop collapsing. But because there will be very high rates of inflation then, this will also make gold keep moving further higher. And it will also cause people's mortgages to vaporize. When there's high rates of inflation, it evaporates people's debt because prices go up and wages tend to go up, but the debt is fixed at fixed interest rates. So if you have a house and you have a 50% mortgage on it, and we have high rates of inflation, that wipes away your debt. It wipes away your mortgage. So you can view mortgage debt, for instance, as an investment strategy. When there's high rates of inflation, it's going to make your mortgage debt disappear. So those are things that normal Americans could do as this crisis, this dollar crisis 2025 unfolds.
Good. Anyway, I only know what's going on with YouTube, but they have pictures from China about unemployment. That also means there's unemployment in the U.S. coming, because what Trump wants to do is make MAGA, make America great again. He wants our jobs. He wants our factories to come back. But as you've said to me many times, it's not going to come back to the U.S. The factories will go on to lower wage countries like Vietnam and Pakistan and all that. So the person who's holding for a job my concern is unemployment. So let's say macro 2025 hits, what's going to happen to unemployment in both East and West and Europe?
Well, unemployment is going to go up in China and it's going to go up in the United States. Unemployment rate now is still very low, but I think that's all about to change because the policies President Trump has announced have been so chaotic that it's really crushed consumer sentiment and business sentiment. So the consumer confidence is at record low levels nearly, and their consumers are going to spend less, and businesses don't know what to do. They don't know if the tariffs are going to be 10% or 1,000% or how long they're going to last. So they don't know whether they should bring their factories back to the U.S. or not. They're all just frozen. They're not doing anything. They're not investing. They just want to cut costs now before their revenues collapse so that their profits won't entirely disappear. So as consumers spend less and businesses invest less, businesses are going to fire people, and the unemployment rate's going to move significantly higher.
Yep. So
and
Richard,
at that point, the Fed will begin cutting interest rates, and perhaps quite quickly.
And they'll print more money, and inflation keeps going. And
that's right.
The rich get richer because what inflation affects things like gold and silver to go up, but also chicken and eggs to go up. Chicken, eggs, and milk will go up. So that's why the average person right now is going, I don't know what's going on. You've got to do something. And so give us a little bit more on what you cover in Macro Watch, because what you have is the macro. My cash flow board game is the micro. What can the individual do? So give us one more pitch on Macro Watch.
So Macro Watch, I've now been making Macro Watch videos since October 2013. I make a couple of videos every month discussing something important happening in the global economy, focusing primarily on the U.S. economy and what the government is doing, what the Fed is doing, what's happening with credit growth, and what's happening with quantitative easing, for instance, and then translating these developments into how the asset prices are likely to be affected. So over the last couple of months, in December, I published a video called, "Is the Everything Bubble About to Pop?" And now, of course, we can see it is. Today's video is called "The Dollar Crisis 2025, explaining why the dollar is likely to lose another 30% of its value over the next couple of years and the implications of that. And so I track the most important developments happening in the global economy and explain using charts in very simple language what this means.
Richard,
Yes.
You just hit it. What Richard does is macro watch. We should change it to suicide watch. Really, but
It's not that bad. Sometimes I'm bullish. Sometimes it's going up.
when people read your thing, you have charts. What I mean, pictures, and then you explain it simply so the layperson like me can understand it. And then the next question is, what are you going to do about it? So that's why, Richard, what you do is priceless. And again, there's a discount if they put the word crash in there?
Right. If they can find MacroWatch on my website, if they type in richardduncaneconomics.com, richardduncaneconomics.com, they'll be taken to my homepage, and there they can hit the subscribe button, and they'll be prompted to put in a coupon code. And if they type in crash, they can subscribe at a 50% discount. I mean, we're not talking thousands and thousands of dollars. This is really very affordable. And they will immediately have access to 100 hours of MacroWatch videos in the archives. And MacroWatch really tries to explain to people how the economy really works today in this modern world where money is no longer backed by gold. It's backed by nothing. This completely changes the way the economy works and the way that the government manages the economy. So the goal of MacroWatch is to teach people how the economy really works in the 21st century and all about the forces driving the financial markets, driving up the stock market and the property market, or driving them down so that they can make better investment decisions for themselves. So I upload a new video every couple of weeks. They're normally 15 or 20 minutes long. They have 30 or 40 charts. And I hope your listeners will check it out and subscribe to MacroWatch.
Richard, it's priceless. Priceless. Because from macro, you go micro. ¿Qué pasa? What are you going to do about it? That's the question. And that's why, I appreciate our friendship for all these years. And thank you for being one of the great educators of our times, Richard. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you for being my mentor and for your friendship over the years.
That's mutual here. So we help each other. So when we come back, we'll final word. And again, thank you, Richard, for all you do for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
We'll be right back. Welcome back, and thank you to Richard Duncan. And please remember his product is called MacroWatch. You go to his website, Richard Duncan Economics, and put crash, and you get a 50% discount for it. It's more than the price, it's priceless. Because today I've never seen it so bad. For the last 25 years, we knew this was coming. I hate to say this, he kept warning all of us, but a lot of people have not listened. And now he's more terrified, I'm more terrified than ever before. What's going to happen next? So this is not a time to be stupid or ignorant. This is a time to pay attention. And I appreciate all of you paying attention to the Rich Dad Radio Show, because I'll do my best to make sure that we all get through this together. But we're going to some very, very turbulent times, possibly a global depression, and worse than that would be a war. So please take care, and we'll see you next Rich Dad Radio Show. Thank you for being a viewer. Thank you.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.